Hi, welcome to another video of this channel. In this video, I'll cover the past within, looking at how the cubes and timelines of Rusty Lake work. But first, some context. You might remember in Roots, Albert had a daughter named Rose, and in 1926 he was killed by his nephew, Frank. In the past within, we learn more about his death. Somehow, Albert knew he was going to die, and prepared a plan to resurrect himself, just like his great-uncle did. He built something called a cubical device for Rose to use to help resurrect him. I'll explain more about this later. It's unclear how Albert knew his future or how to build the device, but his prediction came true and he died at the age of 55 in 1926. At that time, the cubical device couldn't be used yet, and Rose was already busy resurrecting another dead family member. She continued helping William, carrying out his ritual and giving birth to his reincarnation. But by the time Rose raised Laura into childhood, she was forced to leave her daughter and move into a lab to help Albert, who had somehow become a corrupted soul, with his plan. The plan was to build a tank that could combine his bone, flesh and blood with his corrupted soul to make him into a human again. But there's a problem! Rose couldn't use his body parts because his body wasn't around anymore. That's where the cubical device and the cubes come in. Cubes are one of Rusty Lake's focuses, so it's important to understand how they work. In Rusty Lake, memories can be extracted from the brain and turned into cubes, which are a sort of time travel device. When you enter them, you go back in time to when and where the memories took place. But you're not just directly going backwards through time. What happens is, when you enter a cube, a new alternate timeline is created. A copy of the time of the memory branching off the original timeline. Any new events inside this timeline don't affect the original one. We can see this happening in Cube Escape Birthday. Dale entered a cube containing a memory of his house in 1939, the day his parents were killed. This time he changes the events so that his parents survive. But even though his parents are alive there, they're still dead outside the cube's timeline. The version of reality where his parents are alive is an alternate timeline, completely separate from the original. Now here's the interesting thing about cubes. They only contain one single scene based on the memory they were created from. They can be different lengths, but they all can only represent one memory. From what we've seen, it looks like once you finish the cube scene, you're basically kicked out of that cube and returned to the original timeline. We see this in Paradise, where Jacob finds his mother's cubes. When he enters them, he's transported to her memories, and when the scene ends, he returns to the present. The same happens in Birthday. Once the 1939 memory ends, Dale finds himself in the elevator again, like nothing happened. Let's imagine the timelines of Rusty Lake this way. The original timeline is a long straight line. The cubes, with their short alternate timelines, are like short lines branching off the main one. Some branches could even have smaller branches. Now, this time structure starts looking familiar. It closely resembles the trees we see at the bottom of the lake, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I feel like the developers made the trees like that on purpose, to hint at how the timeline structure looks. And since the lake has multiple trees, what if this means there are multiple, totally parallel universes completely separate from each other? That's a topic for another video though, and I won't go too deep into that rabbit hole. At any rate, with alternate timelines in mind, Albert's idea was to create a new one branching off from 1926 when his body was still around. This would let Rose extract the bone, flesh and blood from the cube for the resurrection later on. And so, before building the resurrection tank, she first built a memory extraction machine to extract a cube from herself containing 1926. Rusty Lake Untold, the lab, their tabletop game, seems to take place during that time. It shows that Rose ran many experiments on cubes, even testing the extraction machine on unknowing subjects who we play as. Her lab has a kitchen and bedroom in it, suggesting she was fully living in it by then, working on creating an alternate version of 1926. But there's a problem. You can't just take stuff out of a cube. Entering a cube isn't really a physical process, it's more like a mental transfer. In Birthday, for example, when Dale enters the cube, he doesn't appear as a 42-year-old man. Based on his parents' reaction, it looks like he became his 9-year-old self the way he was in 1939. It seems only your mind travels between timelines, not your whole body. So, Rose couldn't just stroll into the cube, collect the substances and walk out with them. No, her mind would leave, but the physical substances would be left behind in the cube with her past self. And there's another problem anyway. When entering the cube, the mind also reverts back to how it was at the time. When Dale enters the birthday cube, it's like he's experiencing everything for the first time. He has no memory of what happened that day, he has no idea of what's going to happen, and he does everything the exact same way he did before. The memory only ended differently because Mr. Owl used his magic cube powers to interfere with the memory. So even if Rose could take items out, she wouldn't remember that she needed to once she entered, and she would just relive the whole memory and be ejected empty-handed. Fortunately, Albert knew about this and created the Cubical Device to solve this problem. Here's what the Cubical Device does. When you place a cube into it, it creates a real physical link between the original timeline and the cube's timeline. It acts like a bridge between timelines so that physical objects can be transferred between them. Not only that, it allows both timelines to run at the same time. I believe that normally, the cube's timeline is paused until you enter it. When you do, that activates it and makes the outside timeline paused. Then, if you leave the cube and return to the present, that will probably activate the original timeline again and freeze the alternate one. The point is, both timelines are usually independent and can't be active at the same time. But what the Cubical Device does is it keeps the cube timeline permanently activated, while the original timeline is still running, so that both timelines can flow at the same time. Without the device, that's impossible. So Rose then had to spend a few years creating the Cubical Device, using Albert's one as a starting point. There's a secret station in Underground Blossom that takes place just after she completed the device. Based on the train map, this scene happens in the 1970s when Rose was in her 60s. In the level, we first find Albert's corrupted soul. It looks like his daughter was keeping him in a cage so he wouldn't cause trouble. Then we see Rose herself. She uses the cube extraction machine to create a cube containing 1926 and puts it into the Cubical Device to run a test program. This test program seems to be where the demo version of The Past Within takes place, and it's a success. But wait, although the cubes were sorted out, she still hadn't made the actual resurrection tank itself, the most important part of the plan. Another decade was spent on that. By the time all the preparation was done, Rose was now 75 in the year 1984. After 40 years of work building the memory extraction machine, the Cubical Device and the resurrection tank. That's when the game finally takes place. The Past Within shows two perspectives, Rose in 1984 at the Cubical Device and Rose inside the 1926 cube within the device. That's why the game is called The Past Within. At the beginning of the game, we see that Albert left past Rose a note, telling her to wait for future Rose to establish contact. So it seems the Cubical Device creates such a strong connection between the cube and the main timeline that even sound can pass through, allowing future Rose to communicate with past Rose. While we don't actually hear them talking in-game, I think the player's communication in real life is meant to represent the two Roses' communication. Of course, the first time Rose read that note, nothing would have happened since she was in the original timeline, not the one within the device. So Albert's note would have been wrong the first time around. But he couldn't do much about that, could he? The next part of the game is a tutorial that introduces the connection between the past and the future. First, past Rose lights the stove and the smoke from it starts coming out of the device. Then future Rose activates the device's ventilation and the wind actually blows into the cube, clearing the smoke away. Next, when future Rose looks through a lens on the device, she can see directly into the room, and even past Rose herself. Past Rose can also see future Rose from the other side. The cubical device sure does create a really strong connection. Anyway, after that tutorial, the resurrection plan properly begins. First, past Rose finds Albert's dead body. We can see the mark on his forehead from when his brain was removed in Roots. But fortunately, this doesn't affect the plan. Next, future Rose helps past Rose unlock a hidden altar containing tools she can use to extract Albert's bone, flesh and blood. It's worth noting, the altar's orange and yellow colour scheme is similar to the furniture from the chapel in case 23, which also resembles the furniture in the Vanderboom house's lab basement thing. Maybe Albert took the altar from the basement? Either way, while collecting flesh, past Rose finds Albert's diary. In it, he wrote about how Emma stole his butterfly, how he was laughed at when the beehive fell on his head, and how Ida apparently broke his heart when she married Samuel, which made him break her heart in return by literally stabbing her in the chest. He also wrote that he knew he was going to die after losing a game of chess. So, in my video on the second half of Roots, I claimed Albert won the last game of chess and that his crown appearing symbolised that he captured Frank's king. But now I think that although he did win the first game, the crown on his head wasn't to represent his victory, but to show that the White King was his the second round. Frank and Albert switched sides during the rematch. The two chess games are a metaphor for Albert and Frank's journey. Albert won the first time, just like how he bested Frank in 1981, but Frank won the second game, representing how he then killed Albert. Maybe beating Albert at chess gave Frank the courage to kill Albert in real life. Either way, Albert's prediction actually was accurate. But how did he predict it? It could be some fortune telling he picked up from Ida. Or maybe it was the beaked, corrupted soul. There was this mysterious corrupted soul that appeared a few times in Roots. It's very unclear who it is and what it was doing, but it seemed to be influencing and guiding Albert's decisions. It could be that it was the one who gave Albert his strange masks that changed the weather and affected his mood. Maybe it also warned Albert of his death, helped him design the cubical device and the plan, and turned him into a corrupted soul after he died, as some sort of grand scheme? After all, I don't think Albert would know that much about cubes, souls, and the future on his own. But it's hard to say, since we kind of don't know anything about this weird thing. In any case, past Rose successfully extracts Albert's bone, flesh and blood. But there's yet another problem. When objects come in or out of the cubical device, they don't change size to fit the scale of the world they're transferred into. Instead, they stay at exactly the same scale as the cube. The cubical device basically turns cubes from portals to other timelines into miniature dollhouses. So, if past Rose tried to give future Rose the substances, they would appear tiny. Even if past Rose gave her Albert's entire body, it would still be way too small to use. But again, they had already prepared a solution. You know how in past Rose's timeline, there's also a cubical device, the original one built by Albert? That was part of their plan, to create a new cube that contains 1984 and put that inside the original device. That means future Rose would be inside the cube, not outside, So if past Rose gave her the substances, they would actually appear bigger. They would become so much bigger that a single tooth, one ear, and a small vial of blood would be enough. But the thing is, cubes are created from memories, which are always of the past. But 1984 is the future from past Rose's perspective. So how can a cube containing the future be made? Not just the future, but the future of a different timeline. Sadly, Albert never made a future cube producing machine, so Rose did it herself. She made it so the cubical device can cause a voltage spike, and because the device is connected to the past, the energy from the spike will be channeled into past Rose's room. As the energy is from the original timeline, it carries the essence from that timeline into the alternate one. Because of that, the energy can be properly channeled into a cube, a new timeline containing 1984. So basically, future Rose presses Ctrl-C and past Rose presses Ctrl-V. But there's another step. First, for some reason, past Rose needed Albert's corrupted soul to channel the energy correctly. She somehow, with zero inconvenience, turns his dead body into a conscious soul by putting coins on his eyes. I'm not sure how that worked. I'm guessing this was only a representation of a more complicated process she used. But either way, as planned, future Rose triggers a voltage spike on the device and uses fuses to protect past Rose from, exploding or being electrocuted or something. Albert, now sentient as a ghost, channels the energy from 1984 to form a golden cube. Just like the memory cubes, the golden cube also opens a new timeline, but it doesn't branch off the timeline it was created in. Instead, it branches off the original timeline, as that's where the energy came from. And instead of containing the past, it contains the present, flowing perfectly in parallel with the original timeline. Past Rose places the golden cube into the original cubical device. So past and future Rose have switched places. Now, future Rose is the one within the cube, while past Rose is the one outside the cube, the opposite of how it was before. Now that the past and the future have switched places, the perspective also switches. The past goes from 2D to 3D to show that it's now outside the cube, while the future goes from 3D to 2D to show that it's now inside the cube. Anyway, next, the actual resurrection begins. As planned, past Rose uses the original cubical device to transfer Albert's bone, flesh and blood into the golden cube right to future Rose's lab. Then, future Rose takes the substances and transports them to the resurrection tank where Albert's corrupted soul is. But there's another step. The tank needs power to work, a lot of it. Thankfully, as we saw in Cube Escape: The Cave, cubes can be used to power things up. So, future Rose had to eject the black cube out of the cubical device, which should have deactivated the timeline of the past. But, as 1984 became an alternate timeline, there are now two copies of 1984, the alternate timeline and the original, which means there are now two cubes containing 1926. I'm guessing these two black cubes both lead to the same timeline, since they're the same cube, so even if the black cube in the new timeline is ejected, the 1926 timeline won't deactivate, because the black cube in the original timeline is still in the device. It was a very complicated plan, but it worked, and future Rose could harness the energy from the black cube to power the tank. With the tank powered, future Rose could transfer the substances to Albert's corrupted soul without any problems. And, like I said, because 1984 is now within a cube, the substances appear massive when they entered future Rose's lab. At one point, a random bee flies into the device and appears as a huge beast from future Rose's perspective. Eventually, future Rose finishes transferring the substances to Albert's corrupted soul, and he is resurrected as a human. He's back! and he looks just as young as he was when he was 18 years old. Amazing! Albert gets dressed and immediately starts wearing his masks again. The snow mask creates snow, and the music mask, the one he wore during the family band scene from Roots, radiates music. And the deer mask makes blood appear. This suggests that the deer mask, and perhaps others, fills Albert with a bloodlust, makes him become even more violent than usual, and gives him dark voodoo powers. I mean, during the time Albert wasn't wearing any masks, he acted kind of civil, playing games, music, doing wholesome activities with his family. But as soon as he puts on a mask, he becomes violent, changing the weather, ruining his nephew's life, and orchestrating his sister's suicide. When he puts on the deer mask, it twists him into an even more bloodthirsty and powerful person, summoning dark magic and killing his brother, sister-in-law, and mother, while traumatizing his other nephew. The deer mask, which the beaked, corrupted soul gave him. The beaked, corrupted soul was there when Albert decided to kill Emma. It was the one who gave Albert the deer mask of evil, and could also have been the one who gave Albert the other masks. It definitely seems like this beaked, corrupted soul was trying to manipulate and influence Albert, giving him the deer mask and potentially controlling him with the other masks too, and helping him with his resurrection. The question is, why? Well, I don't know. Almost everything about this enigmatic demon is unknown, so it's impossible to say. Anyway, the resurrection is done.
Me back
Yay!
to life. But we are not finished yet.
But there's another problem. This is the last one, I promise. It appears that because Future Rose's lab is within the cubicle device, there's now nothing beyond that room. As we saw with the bee, when it flies out of the room, it doesn't end up somewhere else in the lab. No. When the bee leaves, it ends up back outside Albert's device. So if Albert and his daughter try to leave the lab, they'd just end up in the 1926 cube, and they'd also be a lot smaller. They'd appear as miniature people, which would be no good. Albert is not satisfied with spending his new life within a cube forever, and he has a plan. Remember when I said that when you enter a cube, only your mind travels into it and your body stays in the same place? This was previously a problem, but here it's Rose and Albert's ticket back to the original timeline. This is what they do. First, Future Rose removes the black cube from the tank, and Past Rose removes the golden cube from the original cubicle device. Interestingly, this doesn't immediately deactivate Future Rose's timeline. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because the golden cube contains the present instead of the past. While the past is a fixed point in time, the present is constantly moving and changing. Because of that, the place the golden cube leads to could also be constantly updating and moving, flowing in sync with the original timeline, even without Albert's cubicle device. Albert's cubicle device was only needed to transport the substances. Anyway, Future Rose enters the black cube. At exactly the same time, Past Rose enters the golden cube. Future Rose's mind is transferred to Past Rose, but Past Rose's mind is transferred to Future Rose. But it can't, because Future Rose's mind was already in Past Rose's, but Past Rose's mind was going to Future Rose's. But that can't happen either, because Future Rose already had her mind in Past Rose's, who couldn't either because it's an infinite loop. It's impossible for either of their minds to go to either body, and are unable to enter either timeline. So, their minds basically collide and are forced into the middle where the original timeline is. I'm guessing Albert did the same thing since he was also holding the cube in both the past and the future. And that's how Rose and Albert returned to the original timeline. Next, something interesting happens. Because past and future Rose were the same person, just from different points in time, existing at the same time causes them to merge into a single entity. They blend together, becoming a tree at the bottom of the lake. That's because trees represent the present. In Paradox, we found out that the present is represented by a certain symbol. In Underground Blossom, that very same symbol appeared right next to the tree that Rose became. Also, the symbol itself looks a lot like a tree. Plus, the symbol is associated with wood, which comes from trees. So it makes sense that the past and future would combine to create a tree. Oh, also, the tree is used to resurrect Rose's dead daughter Laura, bringing the count of dead family members resurrected by Rose to 3. It also turns out this was her plan the entire time, but I'll talk more about this in my video on Underground Blossom. So, what happens now that Albert's back? Well, I don't think it's good news. Albert wasn't reincarnated through a samsara ritual, like William. No. He had his corrupted soul stuffed into a replica of his body created in a machine. His resurrection feels unnatural and artificial. Considering just how many problems and workarounds Rose had to deal with, it seems like his resurrection was chaotic and simply wrong. He exploited the cubes to cheat the system, upsetting the very rules and balance of Rusty Lake. Which is probably why William didn't follow this path. That's why I think Albert's synthesized enlightenment done in a lab is going to create problems for the Day of the Lake. The Day of the Lake is the opposite of Albert's plan. It is sacred, spiritual, and ordained by the lake itself. The Day of the Lake is the ritual where the lake grants an enlightenment and another person dies to balance it out. For the upcoming one, the two people will be Dale and Laura. One of them will die, and the other will become immortal, succeeding Mr. Owl as the next ruler of the lake. This specific Day of the Lake is particularly exciting as the lucky winner for the first time in centuries gets to become a special, divine, never-before-seen being, a Deva, the highest realm of samsara, translating to God. This natural ritual will happen at the Rusty Lake Hotel. But just before the ritual, Albert will appear. He'll be wearing his dear mask of evil. He will crash the party and cause absolute chaos and mayhem, leading to the next game, where we'll play as Harvey and fix the mess Albert caused, just in time for Dale and Laura's arrival. Now, this is a bit of a long shot, but maybe this destruction is what the beaked, corrupted soul wanted. Perhaps it was some enemy of Mr. Owl, and orchestrated Albert's death and freaky rebirth to sabotage the Day of the Lake. Again, though, we know nothing about this creature, so who knows? Next, Dale will become enlightened and transform into a powerful deer-themed being, as the book in Paradox suggests that Devas are related to deer, and there's a lot of foreshadowing that Dale will become one. Then the Alanders' corrupted souls will show up, since Mr. Owl was too weak to stop them. Dale will deal with them. He'll definitely have a bone to pick with Mr. Rabbit in particular. But we won't be getting the Day of the Lake game for a while. The next game is probably Servant of the Lake, where we'll see Aldous and William in their younger days. Then there'll be the never-before-seen Vanderboom's sister, or wife, who is mysteriously murdered just before giving birth to James Vanderboom. This will motivate the brothers to begin researching samsara and experimenting with alchemy in a futile attempt to bring her to life. Either that, or it was Mr. Owl who wanted them to recreate the elixir since Aldous seemed to know him. We'll likely play as Aldous and William's butler, also known as the Servant of the Lake, much like the poor intern from the newest game, the Mr. Rabbit Magic Show. That game also hinted at the premium Rusty Lake Untold game, where we'll play as some team of archaeologists who discover the ruins of the Vanderboom brothers' secret lab or something. Looks like we're getting a lot of sudden focus on the Vanderbooms, maybe to make up for all the games we got about Dale. But after all those spin-offs, we might just finally get the game about the Day of the Lake. The last game to properly follow the storyline was Paradox, and that was 7 years ago, so this game better be worth the wait. and there better be a reference to Harvey's song or I'm not playing. Let me know in the comments what you think the future of Rusty Lake will be, or if you have any theories of your own. Make sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss my next video. Thanks for watching.